Hello, everyone, and welcome to our TaxCycle webinar on T777 employment expenses. I'm Elizabeth Kohl, and I'm going to lead you through this short webinar to help you learn how to prepare this form in TaxCycle T1. Today, we're going to look at the T777 employment expenses form, and we're going to start out actually talking about the T2200 and a little bit about a T4 slip that you need to do so you can fill out the information you need on the worksheet. We'll talk about entering those expenses and linking motor vehicle expenses, calculating workspace in the home, and then treating some of the special cases. There's a couple of little tricks to know about tradespeople, apprentices, artists, or forestry workers. I'll show you how to trigger the GST 370 on the T777, and finally, a tip on entering union and professional dues. I'm going to pop out to TaxCycle and get started. All right, so this is the this isn't the T777. This is the T2200. So the reason I start with this form is because this is what helps you know what you can claim on the T777. So someone who's claiming employment expenses should have a copy of this form. And actually in TaxCycle, if you're preparing T4 slips for your clients, you can also prepare a T2200 for those recipients if they're work from home or they have expenses to claim. So look for that in TaxCycle T4 if your clients also need that. But the basics of this form is that it explains the conditions of employment and the types of expenses that have been reimbursed versus those that the employee has paid themselves. So it's a good one to read through. You don't have to include it in TaxCycle. You don't have to enter those details in here when the employee gives it. But if you include it, then at least you have your own copy of it. Information from this form doesn't flow to the T777. It's really just a record for you to keep on file and remind yourself next year, too, that they should have one with you. They should have one to give you. Completing the T777 worksheet, actually, let's go look here in the worksheets folder. So there's the T777 form. I'm actually in the wrong folder for this. Let's do this one more time. It's in the deductions folder on the sidebar here. So there's the T777 form itself. This is the prescribed federal form. And in TaxCycle, what we have done is create a related worksheet to help you with data entry. This has a lot more flexibility and can help you with the calculations you need without being limited to what's going on the form, on the prescribed form. If you remember something from today is that before you start filling out this worksheet, the first thing you really need to do is have your T4 slip in the file. That's critical. So here I have a T4 slip. Austin has a T4 slip from Bits and Bytes. So he has a job that is something in IT, and he must do a fair amount of traveling around to do it. So he has his employment income here on this slip. Now, when I go over to the T777 worksheet, I need to select that slip to associate the employment expenses with some employment income. And as soon as I do that, that starts the slip to be filled out. This isn't a multi-copy form. You can't create multiple copies of it in TaxCycle, just so you know. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. It is a multi-copy form. I had that backwards. You could create multiple copies. So if someone changes jobs during the year, you can split those out into the expenses related with either job and relate them separately. You can see in the sidebar here. There's the T77 for Bits and Bytes, and then there's another one here. So with the plus sign, you could start fresh again. All right, so the top of this worksheet will come back to the GST HST rebate section at the top. But it's basically a big table in which you enter the expenses for salaried or commission paid employees. So a few things you need to note from this is that some of these expenses are only applicable to commission paid employees. And others can be applicable to both. So be careful what you're claiming if it's just an employee like myself today working from home versus someone who's actually being paid commission as well. There are different columns here if you are going to apply for the GST HST rebate, you want to apply the correct rate in each column. So let's just put some accounting and legal fees and imagine that this is, here's some accounting and legal fees, and he has GST. But if I was in a province with an HST rate, I would go into, put that in the other column if I was going to claim my GST HST rebate. These percentages, I can choose and shift and change them as I want, so that if I'm crossing borders on certain traveling expenses or things like that, I can apply the correct rate. If you're not sure or you're not going to apply for the GST HST rebate, you can just put amounts in the last column. And then it doesn't matter. You just put them all in that column. A couple of other notes about this worksheet, this table. You will notice that TaxCycle manages the 50% portion of food and beverage and entertainment expenses. So say I put $1,000 in food and beverage, it automatically will take the 50% and use that for the expenses. Similarly for entertainment expenses up here. When it comes to motor vehicle expenses, you will notice that this is a field, these fields are blue and they're not, you can't enter the data in them here. There's another TaxCycle webinar on motor vehicle expenses, but the basics of what you need to know is that you need to associate this worksheet with some mileage here on the motor vehicle expenses worksheet. So there's 75,000 kilometers driven. That was a lot of driving. He did 40,000 of those for his employment expenses. As soon as I do that, it calculates the portion of the expenses that are on the rest of the worksheet and brings it back over here to the T777 worksheet. All right, so I added, while we're on the poll, I added a couple more bits and pieces of expenses here. And why I did this is because I wanted to run down here to the next section and talk to you about the claim method. So TaxCycle has some smarts here, and if it's just a salaried employee, you can, it doesn't really matter. It claims by default as a salaried employee. But if this is a commission employee, and one of the ways you can tell this is that you go over to your T4 slip and you look in box 42 down here, employment commission. So say there's an amount in here. Then he would have the right, Austin would have the right to claim some of the expenses that wouldn't be eligible to salaried employees. And as soon as I have an amount in that box 42, TaxCycle lets me know that I can choose a different expense claim option. So I can play around with these check boxes here on the worksheet. You can let it be smart and it will choose what's the highest of the two. You can see the calculations on the right, which is the best expense claim for them. Or I could claim just as a salaried employee because I want to do that, or a commission paid employee because I have the option to do either. And you see how the amount changes when I do that. Next down on the worksheet, you'll just see that there's a table from the motor vehicle worksheet that basically says the CCA and the operating expenses that are being claimed here. Just so you know, it gives you the summary that you need. But really, these are in green, so you make that, if you double click on that table, you're going to go back to the worksheet to make any changes to it. The next section down the bottom here is workspace in the home. So this is something in our office that we have a lot of people who do. We work at home, some people full-time, and so they are eligible to deduct an area of their home, and there's rules around this, and you'll want to read up on them if you have if you're preparing a return for someone for the first time, in terms of what is an eligible office space, right? But once you've figured that out, you need to calculate, this is very similar to the T2125, the ratio that is used for how much of the, for the expenses related to the business or the employment. So let's imagine I have a 2,000 square foot home and, 400 square foot office or something. That I have that backwards. That's super funny. 400 square foot office and a 2,000 square foot home, that means I'm allowed 20% of the expenses that are against my house. And then, similar to the table above, I would enter in my my expenses for the year. So imagine if my electricity bill has everything on it, the water, the heat, the everything. But actually, then I might want to claim it over here, because apparently I can't claim a GST rebate on water. I might have to divide it out, to be honest with you. In this case, I've done some maintenance on my house. If I had to pay rent, if it was something, rent, if I was renting rather than purchasing. And you can see down the bottom here, it calculates the expenses, and it subtracts the personal portion, and then gives you the expenses that you can deduct. The top right here, it also will show you the maximum amount of workspace claim you can make based on your employment income and the other expenses you have already claimed further up on the form. Now, there's a few cases here where there's some special areas for certain types of employees. So one of those is tradesperson's tools. This will pull amounts from the T4, some amounts from the T4 as well. And also the T4A, I believe. Let me just take a look here. There is box 130, if my notes are still correct. It's way down here. They have some apprenticeship grants as well. So it will relate in there. And then you have your mechanics tools. And if you look at line 2, I want to point out that this doesn't pull the income from the T4 slip in here, because sometimes it's not the entire amount on the T4 slip that you need to enter. So you will need to enter the employment income as eligible apprentice for the year. So make sure you know that you need to do that if you're dealing with an apprentice mechanics tool expenses. And then down, and then there's the disposition section as well. And then you have expenses for employed artists, and you will notice they have a whole CCA section, and you fill it out here, not on a CCA worksheet like in other income statements. And then finally at the bottom, we've got another section for forestry workers as well. So we've talked a bit about the GST, HST rebate, and really if you're claiming it on employment expenses, you need to pay attention to this section at the top. You first off select yes to the question if you want to claim it, and then you have to enter the employer's GST, HST registration number, the employer's. Make sure you remember that. And as soon as I enter that, answer yes to that, I can go to my GST 370, and TaxCycle does the heavy lifting over there to calculate the claim. So you'll want to review that and use your professional judgment about what's going on there. And finally, I wanted to show you a little tiny bit about the professional, the union and professional dues, because they can also be claimed. If you're on your T4 slip, box 44 here, let's say there were some union dues over the year. This flows straight into the deductions worksheet. And this is also a place you can enter additional dues if they're not on a T4 slip. And then you can indicate here on the right whether to include them on the GST, whether or not to include them as well. And there it says, are they eligible for the GST, HST rebate? Then you would select the yes or the no and select the rate. And there we are. We are almost finished. You've got your 2 polls. You've watched the whole thing. So we're almost done here. I just want to remind you that the things that I've talked about today are on our website. There is a topic all about the T777, about calculating the claim and some of the different claims you can make. And in addition, of course, this will be available on demand. But we did a webinar previously on motor vehicle expenses. So if you want to see how to prepare that motor vehicle expenses worksheet before associating it with this one, I suggest you go and watch that webinar, and you can find that in our on-demand training page on our website. And I would like to thank you all for being here today. And hopefully you've been able to get a sense of how to navigate around the 777 worksheet in TaxCycle. And have a good rest of your day. And thank you, John, for your help as well.